The weather forecast had been wrong before, but never this catastrophically. Linda Barnes stood behind the counter of Kingston's last stop, watching the local news anchors' increasingly frantic warnings about the incoming blizzard. Unprecedented. Snowfall. Wind speeds exceeding 70 miles. Complete travel shutdown recommended. The words felt distant until she glanced outside and saw the first fat flakes beginning to swirl. Her father's diner sat at the intersection of Highway 35 and County Road 12, a lifeline for truckers traveling between Des Moines and Cedar Rapids. The neon sign outside, red letters spelling hot food, cold beer, warm welcome, had guided countless travelers through Iowa's harsh winters for 37 years. Robert Barnes had built this place with his own hands after returning from Vietnam, transforming an abandoned gas station into something more than a business. It was a sanctuary. Linda had inherited more than just the diner when her father passed 3 years ago. She'd inherited his unshakable belief that no one should face the cold alone. The framed photo behind the register showed him in his dress, uniform, young and proud, before the war changed everything. Below it hung his Purple Heart and a handwritten sign. For those who serve, for those who drive, you're home here. The first warning signs came with the afternoon shift change. The usual stream of truckers had dwindled to a trickle, then stopped entirely. By 5 p.m., only 2 regulars remained. Tom Patterson, a Vietnam vet who drove the same route 5 days a week, and Maria Santos, whose refrigerated truck carried medical supplies to rural hospitals. Both checked their radios constantly, their faces growing grimmer with each weather update. "Linda, honey," Tom called from his corner booth, "you should close up. This thing's gonna be a monster." She refilled his coffee without hesitation. "My father never closed for weather, neither will I." But as she watched the snow begin to fall in earnest, transforming the parking lot into a white void, Linda felt the first flutter of genuine fear. The old generator in the back room wheezed and coughed, barely keeping the lights on. The furnace was older still, held together by duct tape and prayers. If the power grid failed, and in storms like this it always did, she'd be running on. Borrowed time. Maria's radio crackled to life with urgent chatter. Military convoy stranded 5 miles north. Engines frozen. Requesting immediate assistance. Linda's heart clenched. Soldiers. Caught in the storm, just like her father. Had been caught in the jungles of Southeast Asia 40 years ago. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the glass. The cold bit through immediately, making her fingers ache. Outside, the world was disappearing under a blanket of white fury. Somewhere out there, young men and women in uniform were fighting for their lives against an enemy as merciless as any they'd face in combat. Linda looked back at her father's photo, remembering his stories about frozen foxholes and soldiers who never made it home. She'd grown up hearing about the buddy system, about never leaving anyone behind, about the sacred duty to help those who serve. The wind howled louder now, rattling the windows and making the old building creak. Tom and Maria exchanged worried glances, but Linda felt something else entirely. Not fear, purpose. Whatever was coming, Kingston's last stop would be ready. It had to be. She walked to the supply closet and began pulling out every blanket, towel, and emergency kit she could find. If soldiers were coming, she'd be waiting. With open doors and hot food, just like her father would have done, just like she'd promised him she always would. The convoy appeared through the snow like ghosts materializing from another world. Linda had been watching the road for over an hour, her breath fogging the window as she strained to see through the whiteout conditions. When the first set of headlights finally pierced the curtain of snow, her heart hammered against her ribs. 12 soldiers stumbled through her front door in a rush of Arctic air and desperation. Their uniforms were caked with ice, their faces raw and red from exposure. Some could barely walk, leaning heavily on their comrades. The youngest looked no older than 19, his lips blue and his whole body shaking uncontrollably. "Ma'am," the sergeant gasped, ice crystals clinging to his beard. "Our convoy's dead about 5 miles up. Everything froze, engines, radios, heaters. We saw your sign through the storm. Can we—" "Don't ask, just move," Linda interrupted, already grabbing armfuls of towels from behind the counter. "Get those wet clothes off and get by the kitchen, now." But as she ushered them toward the warmth, Linda caught something in the sergeant's expression that made her stomach drop. The way his eyes darted around the diner, cataloging exits and potential threats. The careful distance he maintained from his men. The radio clipped to his belt that he kept checking even though she could see it was dead. Sergeant Jake Morrison was not what he appeared to be. While the soldiers thawed by the industrial ovens, Linda worked frantically to feed them. She emptied her freezer, serving up every last can of soup, every piece of cornbread she'd baked that morning. The men ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which, Linda realized with growing unease, might actually be true. It was Tom Patterson who first voiced what Linda was beginning to suspect. "That ain't no standard military convoy," he whispered, pulling her aside while the soldiers were distracted. "Look at their gear. Look at how they move. That's special operations, Linda, the kind of unit that doesn't get stranded by accident." Linda's blood chilled. Special operations meant classified missions. Classified missions meant secrets. And secrets, she was learning, meant danger. The storm was getting worse by the hour. The power flickered twice, then died completely, plunging the diner into darkness broken only by her emergency kerosene lamps. Linda fired up the backup generator, but she knew it wouldn't last long. Soon they'd be relying on body heat and prayer. As she set up makeshift sleeping arrangements in the storage room behind the diner, Linda overheard fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. Words like compromised, pursuit, and eliminate witnesses. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that the stress and exhaustion were making her paranoid. Then she saw Jake Morrison slip outside into the blizzard with a satellite phone. Through the frosted window, she watched him pace back and forth in the parking lot, speaking urgently into the device. His body language was tense, aggressive. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, his expression had changed completely. The desperate gratitude was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her with careful steps, "my commanding officer wants to speak with you about compensation for your hospitality." Linda's father had taught her to read people, and what she read in Jake Morrison's eyes terrified her. This wasn't about compensation. This was about covering tracks, about making sure no one could identify the soldiers who'd taken shelter here, about ensuring that what happened in Kingston's last stop stayed in Kingston's last stop. As the wind howled outside and her generator coughed its way toward failure, Linda realized she might have saved these soldiers' lives, only to put her own in mortal danger. The young men huddled around her makeshift fires weren't just seeking shelter from the storm. They were hiding from something far worse. Linda's hands shook as she ladled soup into plastic bowls, but not from the cold. Jake Morrison sat at the counter now, watching her every move with predatory intensity. His men had spread throughout the diner, not resting, she realized, but positioning themselves at strategic points. One by the front door, another near the back exit, a third with clear sightlines to the windows. "Your father was military," Jake said, his voice deceptively casual as he gestured toward the Purple Heart on the wall. "Vietnam, right? He'd understand. The importance of operational security." Linda's stomach clenched. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." Jake's smile was sharp as winter ice. "You're a smart woman, Linda. Smart enough to run this place alone. Smart enough to survive. Out here? Smart enough to know that some conversations never happened." The youngest soldier, the one who'd been shaking so violently when they arrived, caught Linda's eye from across the room. For just a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, and she saw something that made her blood freeze. Terror. Not of the storm outside, but of the man sitting at her counter. Maria Santos appeared beside Linda, refilling her own coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked quietly, but her eyes were fixed on Jake Morrison with unmistakable suspicion. "Everything's fine," Jake answered before Linda could speak. "Just making sure our hostess understands how grateful we are for her discretion." Tom Patterson emerged from the restroom, his face grim. "Linda, that generator's running awful rough. Might want to check the fuel levels." But his eyes weren't on the generator. They were on the soldier stationed near the back door. the one whose hand rested casually on his sidearm. Linda's mind raced. Her father had told her stories about soldiers who came back different, who'd done things in the jungle that haunted them forever. But this felt like something else entirely. These weren't traumatized veterans seeking shelter. They were operatives maintaining control. The storm provided perfect cover. No witnesses, no communications, no way for anyone to verify their story or call for help. If something happened here tonight, it would be days before anyone found the bodies. The blizzard would erase all evidence, leaving only another tragic tale of people caught unprepared by nature's fury. When Jake excused himself to check on his men, Linda seized her chance. She grabbed Tom's arm and pulled him into the walk-in, cooler, where the thick walls would muffle their voices. "They're not who they say they are," she whispered urgently. Tom nodded grimly. "Figured that out when I saw the youngest one's tattoo. That's not military ink, Linda. That's prison work." Linda's heart hammered. "We have to get word out somehow." "How? Storm knocked out the phone lines, cell towers are down, and that generator won't last another hour." Tom's expression was grim, but determined. "But I still got tricks from my army days. Question is, you willing to risk everything to find out what these boys are really running from?" Linda thought of her father's photo, of his unwavering belief that doing right was worth any risk. She thought of the young soldier's terrified eyes, of the way Jake Morrison's smile never reached his own eyes, of the careful positioning of armed men throughout her father's sanctuary. "What do you need me to do?" Tom's weathered face broke into a fierce grin. "Keep them comfortable and distracted. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're onto them. Men like this, cornered and desperate, they'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves." As they stepped back into the main dining area, Linda forced herself to smile and refill coffee cups as if nothing had changed. But inside, every instinct. Her father had taught her about survival was screaming that the real storm wasn't outside. It was sitting at her counter, wearing a sergeant's stripes and a dead man's smile. The generator died at 3:47 a.m. with a final mechanical gasp that seemed to echo through Linda's bones. In the sudden darkness, she heard the unmistakable sound of safeties being clicked off. Multiple weapons positioned around the room. Her blood turned to ice water. "Nobody move," Jake Morrison's voice cut through the darkness, no longer bothering with the pretense of gratitude. "Linda, you got emergency lighting back there?" She fumbled for the kerosene lamps with hands that shook despite her efforts to stay calm. As yellow light flickered to life, illuminating the faces around her, Linda saw that the careful mask had finally dropped completely. These weren't soldiers seeking shelter. They were predators who'd found the perfect hunting ground. The youngest one, the terrified boy she'd noticed earlier, was crying silently in the corner, not from cold or exhaustion, but from something far worse. When Linda met his eyes, he mouthed a single word that made her knees nearly buckle. "Help." Tom Patterson had positioned himself near Maria Santos, both of them pressed against the far wall. His hand was hidden inside his jacket, and Linda realized with a mixture of terror and gratitude that the old veteran had come prepared for trouble. But 3 civilians against 11 armed men in a snowbound diner was hardly favorable odds. "Here's how this is going to work," Jake continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "This storm's going to last another 12 hours, maybe more. When it clears, we're going to walk out of here, and you folks are going to forget we ever existed, because if you don't—" He let the threat hang in the air like smoke. "What did you do?" Linda found herself asking, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "What are you running from?" Jake's laugh was like broken glass. "Wrong question, sweetheart. Right question is, what are we willing to do to keep running?" That's when Linda noticed the blood on the youngest soldier's uniform. Not his own blood. It was in the wrong places for that. Splattered across his chest and sleeves like paint from a crime scene. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Evil men. Count on good people staying quiet. The moment you stop fighting back is the moment you become complicit. The breaking point came when Jake Morrison made his fatal mistake. He walked over to her father's photo and casually knocked it to the floor, the glass shattering with a sound, like gunfire. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Accidents happen in storms like this. Lots of accidents." Linda stared at her father's face among the broken glass, and something inside her snapped into crystal-clear focus. These men had violated her sanctuary, threatened innocent people, and now desecrated the memory of a man who'd given everything for his country. They thought they held all the cards because they had weapons and training, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd assumed Linda Barnes was just another helpless civilian. They'd never considered that Robert Barnes might have taught his daughter a few things about warfare before he died. Things like the importance of knowing your terrain, understanding your enemy's weaknesses, and never, ever giving up without a fight. As Jake Morrison turned away from the broken frame, Linda caught Tom Patterson's eye. The old soldier gave her the slightest nod, his hand moving fractionally inside his jacket. Maria Santos had somehow maneuvered herself closer to the kitchen, where Linda kept her father's old Army-issue field radio, the one piece of military equipment that could punch through any storm. Linda knelt to pick up the broken photo, her fingers closing around a shard of glass. When she stood, her voice was steady as granite. "You made a mistake coming here." Jake Morrison turned back with an amused expression that died when he saw her face. For the first time since they'd arrived, Linda Barnes looked exactly like what she was: Robert Barnes' daughter, protector of Kingston's last stop, and a woman who'd inherited more than just her father's diner. She'd inherited his warriors' heart. Linda's fingers closed around the field radio hidden behind a stack of canned goods, her heart pounding as she prayed the old equipment would still function. Her father had maintained it religiously, just like everything else in the diner, but she hadn't tested it in years. As Jake Morrison's attention focused on intimidating Tom Patterson, she managed to switch it on. Static filled her earpiece, but beneath the interference she caught fragments of emergency chatter. Search and rescue frequencies, state police channels, and something that made her pulse spike: military communications. Real military communications, with call signs and protocols that sounded nothing like Jake Morrison's improvised authority. The youngest soldier, she'd heard Jake call him Danny, had positioned himself near the restroom, but Linda could see him watching her with desperate eyes. During a moment when Jake was distracted, she made brief eye contact and tapped the radio twice. Danny's face went pale, but he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Over the next hour, Linda began to piece together the truth through carefully orchestrated conversations and overheard fragments. These weren't special operations soldiers at all. They were deserters, possibly worse. Jake Morrison had used military uniforms and stolen equipment to stage an elaborate deception, but cracks were showing in his story. The breakthrough came when Maria Santos, with the quiet courage of a woman who'd driven dangerous routes for 20 years, managed to slip Linda a note. "Heard radio chatter earlier. Real Army convoys been searching for stolen vehicles and missing personnel. These aren't the good guys." Linda's blood chilled, but also crystallized into something harder than ice. If these men were using her diner as a hideout while real soldiers were out there searching for them, then everyone in this room was in mortal danger. Deserters had nothing to lose and everything to hide. She began her counterattack with the same methodical precision her father had taught her for managing the diner during crisis. First, she started documenting everything, memorizing faces, listening to conversations, noting details about their weapons and equipment. Second, she began testing their story with seemingly innocent questions that revealed glaring inconsistencies. "That 302nd unit you mentioned," she said casually while refilling Jake's coffee. "Wasn't that the battalion involved in that training exercise near Fort Leonard Wood last month?" Jake's pause was almost imperceptible, but Linda caught it. "Different 302nd, he said quickly. But Linda had grown up listening to her father's military stories. She knew there was only one 302nd Infantry, and they were stationed in Connecticut, not Missouri. Jake Morrison's lies were unraveling, and he was starting to realize it. The real turning point came when Danny approached her during a bathroom break, his young face etched with desperation. "They killed our commanding officer," he whispered, so quietly Linda had to strain to hear. "Made it look like an accident, but I saw what really happened. I tried to report it, but they said I'd be next if I didn't keep quiet. When the investigation started getting close, Morrison convinced us to run, said we'd all go down for it if we stayed." Linda's heart broke for the terrified young man, but her mind was racing with tactical possibilities. "How many of them are actually involved in the murder?" "Just Morrison and 2 others, Stevens and Rodriguez. The rest of us are just scared kids who got in too deep." Danny's voice cracked. "I want to go home, ma'am. I want to tell the truth." "You will," Linda promised, her father's determination flowing through her voice. "But first, we need to survive the night." As Danny returned to his position, Linda felt the familiar weight of her father's service revolver in the drawer beneath the register. Robert Barnes had taught her to shoot when she was 12, and she'd been practicing at the range every month since he died. She'd never imagined she'd need those skills to defend his diner, but life had a way of demanding the unexpected. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, which meant Jake Morrison would soon be making his move. Whatever he planned to do to ensure their silence, it would happen before dawn brought the possibility of rescue. Linda Barnes had spent her entire life preparing to carry on her father's legacy of protecting those who served. Tonight she would discover that sometimes protection meant more than hot coffee and warm shelter. Sometimes it meant war. Dawn was still 2 hours away when Linda heard the sound that changed everything. Helicopters. The distant thrum of rotors cutting through the dying storm made every person in the diner freeze. Jake Morrison's face went white as paper. "Shut off those lamps," he hissed, his weapon appearing in his hand with practiced speed. "Everyone get down and stay quiet." But Linda was already moving. While Jake's attention focused on the approaching aircraft, she activated the emergency beacon hidden in her father's old military radio, the device her father had installed just in case, powered by its own battery and designed to punch through any interference with a signal that screamed, "American citizen in distress." The helicopters passed overhead without landing, but their message was clear. The search was closing in. Jake Morrison was trapped, and trapped animals were the most dangerous of all. "Change of plans," Jake announced, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're leaving, now." "In this storm?" Tom Patterson protested. "That's suicide." "Staying here is worse." Jake's eyes were wild now, darting between the windows and the radio equipment. "Someone's been talking. Someone's been sending signals." Linda's blood turned to acid as Jake's gaze fixed on her. The field radio was still partially visible behind the canned goods, its antenna extended and LED power light glowing like a tiny star. "You clever little bitch," Jake breathed, raising his weapon. "You've been playing us this whole time." But Linda Barnes was her father's daughter, and Robert Barnes hadn't raised a victim. As Jake's finger tightened on the trigger, she dove behind the counter just as Tom Patterson shouted a warning and drew the .45 he'd been concealing all night. The diner erupted into chaos. Tom's first shot took down Stevens, the man positioned by the front door. Maria Santos threw herself toward the kitchen, screaming for everyone to get down. Danny and 3 other young soldiers, the ones who weren't part of Morrison's inner circle, immediately surrendered, throwing their weapons aside and raising their hands. "We're not with him!" Danny screamed over the gunfire. "We're not with Morrison!" Linda's hands found her father's service revolver in the drawer beneath the register. The weight of it was familiar, comforting, like holding a piece of his strength. She'd practiced with this weapon hundreds of times, but never imagined she'd use it to defend the sanctuary he'd built. Jake Morrison was screaming orders at his remaining loyal followers, trying to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling into complete chaos. But the young soldiers who'd been coerced into following him were done being victims. They'd found their courage in Linda's example, and one by one they turned their weapons on their former sergeant. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, Jake Morrison lay bleeding on the floor of Kingston's last stop, surrounded by the shattered remnants of his stolen authority. Rodriguez had taken a bullet in the shoulder but was alive. Stevens was dead, his blood pooling on the linoleum near the door. Linda emerged from behind the counter, her father's revolver still smoking in her hands. She'd fired twice, once to save Tom Patterson's life, once to end Jake Morrison's reign of terror. Both shots had found their marks, just like her father had taught her. The helicopters were returning now, their searchlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Through the diner's windows, Linda could see the real cavalry approaching, state police, FBI, and genuine military personnel with proper identification and legal authority. As Danny and the other coerced soldiers helped secure the scene, Linda walked to where her father's photograph lay among the broken glass. She picked it up gently, brushing away the debris, and hung it back in its place of honor. "We held the line, Dad," she whispered to the image, "just like you taught me." Outside, justice was landing in a whirlwind of rotor wash and flashing lights. But inside Kingston's last stop, the real victory had already been won. Evil had tried to corrupt her father's sanctuary, and it had failed. The diner stood inviolate, its legacy intact, protected by a daughter who'd proven herself worthy of the warrior's blood that flowed in her veins. The aftermath looked like a war zone, but Linda Barnes had never felt more at peace. Federal agents swarmed through Kingston's last stop, documenting evidence and taking statements, while paramedics treated the wounded and the traumatized. The storm had finally broken, revealing a landscape transformed by snow and violence. Special Agent Rebecca Torres of the FBI approached Linda as she sat on a crate in the storage room, her father's revolver finally surrendered to authorities. Torres was a compact woman with steel-gray eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen humanity's worst impulses. "Ms. Barnes," Torres said, settling beside her, "you saved a lot of lives tonight, including your own." Linda stared at her hands, still steady despite everything. "I just did what my father would have done." "Jake Morrison has been on our radar for months," Torres continued. "He murdered his commanding officer during a training exercise, made it look like an accident, then coerced 7 junior soldiers into deserting with him. They've been robbing truck stops and small businesses across 3 states, using stolen military credentials to gain trust before striking." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Linda thought of all the rural diners like hers, family, businesses run by trusting people who respected the uniform. How many had fallen victim to Morrison's deception? How many innocent lives had been destroyed by his betrayal of everything the uniform represented? Danny Williams and the other 4 who turned against Morrison, they'll face court-martial for desertion, but their cooperation tonight will weigh heavily in their favor, Torres explained. They were kids who made a terrible mistake, then found the courage to make it right. That counts for something. Linda nodded, thinking of the terrified young man who'd risked everything to warn her. "They're good kids, just scared and in over their heads." "Like a lot of soldiers," Torres agreed. "The difference is what you do when you realize you're on the wrong side. Tonight they chose correctly." The interviews took hours. Linda recounted every detail she could remember, from the moment the fake convoy arrived to the final gunshots that ended Morrison's rampage. Tom Patterson and Maria Santos provided corroborating testimony, painting a picture of ordinary citizens who'd recognized evil and refused to surrender to it. As the sun finally broke through the dissipating clouds, casting golden light across the snow-covered parking lot, a new convoy arrived. This one flew proper colors and moved with the disciplined precision of genuine military authority. Colonel David Hayes stepped out of the lead vehicle, a career soldier with 3 decades of service, and the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life protecting others. He approached Linda with obvious respect, removing his cap as he extended one hand in greeting. "Ms. Barnes, I'm Colonel Hayes, commanding officer of the real 302nd Infantry. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did here tonight." Linda shook his hand, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "I just protected my father's diner, Colonel. You did more than that. You protected the honor of every soldier who's ever worn this uniform." Hayes gestured toward the damaged interior of the diner, where crime scene technicians were still working. "Men like Morrison are a cancer on everything we stand for. By stopping him, you defended something sacred." The colonel's aide approached with a wooden box, which Hayes accepted with ceremonial precision. "Your father's service record shows he was recommended for a Bronze Star for his actions at Firebase Ripcord. The medal was lost in bureaucratic red tape, never properly awarded. After what you've done here, after how you've honored his memory, I think it's time that wrong was corrected." Linda's eyes filled as Hayes opened the box, revealing the Bronze Star her father had earned but never received. The medal gleamed. In the morning sunlight, a tangible symbol of courage and sacrifice that had somehow found its way home after 4 decades. "He always said the war didn't end when he came back," Linda whispered, accepting the box with trembling hands. "It just changed battlefields." "Smart man," Hayes replied. "Looks like he raised a daughter who understands that too." As the official ceremonies concluded and the various law enforcement agencies prepared to depart, Linda found herself standing alone in the main dining room. The broken glass had been swept up, the blood cleaned away, the evidence catalogued and removed. But something fundamental had changed about the space. It felt different now, not violated or diminished, but somehow strengthened, tested by fire and proven worthy. Her father's sanctuary had faced its greatest challenge and emerged intact, its mission reaffirmed by the courage of those who'd defended it. Danny Williams approached her before being escorted away by military police. His young face was marked by exhaustion and shame, but also by something new: resolution. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I want you to know what you did tonight, how you stood up to him. It reminded me who I used to be, before I got scared, before I let him convince me that running was the only option. Thank you for helping me remember." Linda touched his shoulder gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Danny. Make the most of yours." As the last of the official vehicles departed, leaving only Linda, Tom, and Maria in the aftermath, the 3 survivors sat in companionable silence. They'd been through hell together and emerged as something more than friends. They were family, bound by shared danger and mutual courage. "So," Tom finally said, gesturing at the metal box in Linda's hands, "what now?" Linda looked around at her father's diner, at the photo restored to its place of honor, at the sign that still promised warmth and welcome to those who needed it most. The building might need some repairs, but its spirit was unbroken. "Now we get back to work," she said simply. "Dad always said this place was about more than food and shelter. It's about proving that good people still exist, that honor still matters, that there's always someone willing to stand guard against the darkness." She walked to the front door and switched on the neon sign. Red letters blazed against the pristine morning snow. Hot food, cold beer, warm welcome. Kingston's last stop was open for business. 6 months later, Linda Barnes stood in the same spot where Jake Morrison had once threatened everything she held sacred. But the diner had been transformed. What insurance money couldn't cover, donations from veterans organizations and trucking companies had completed. The old building now gleamed with fresh paint, modern equipment, and expanded facilities that could shelter twice as many travelers. The memorial wall had grown too. Alongside her father's Purple Heart and Bronze Star hung photos and mementos from dozens of veterans and active duty soldiers who'd heard the story of Kingston's last stop. Letters poured in daily from military families thanking Linda for upholding the honor they'd sworn to defend, but the most meaningful addition was smaller, more personal. Framed beside her father's photo was a letter from Danny Williams, written from military prison where he was serving a reduced sentence for desertion. His words were simple, but profound. "Thank you for showing me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being terrified. I'm learning to be brave again." Colonel Hayes had made good on his promise to support the diner's mission. The 302nd Infantry had officially adopted Kingston's last stop as a way station for troops in transit, ensuring a steady stream of legitimate soldiers who understood the sanctuary's true purpose. A discreet plaque by the door now read, "Verified. Safe haven. Military personnel. Welcome." The changes weren't just cosmetic. Linda had used the ordeal to strengthen her father's vision, installing proper emergency communication equipment, upgrading the generator system, and establishing protocols with local law enforcement. If evil ever tried to exploit her hospitality again, she'd be ready. Tom Patterson had become the diner's unofficial security consultant, his combat experience from Vietnam proving invaluable in creating defensive positions that looked like ordinary furniture arrangements. Maria Santos had started an informal network among truckers, spreading word about Kingston's last stop and its commitment to protecting those who served. The transformation was complete on a crisp autumn morning when another convoy approached the diner. Linda's heart skipped a beat until she recognized the proper military markings and disciplined formation. These were real soldiers conducting legitimate operations, seeking nothing more than hot food and human kindness. The commanding officer introduced himself as Captain James Rodriguez, no relation to Morrison's accomplice but a genuine career. Soldier leading a company of National Guard troops returning from disaster relief operations, his men were exhausted, hungry, and grateful for Linda's welcome. As she served coffee and sandwiches to the soldiers, Linda noticed one young private sitting alone at a corner table. He couldn't have been more than 19, with haunted eyes that reminded her painfully of Danny Williams. When she approached, with a fresh cup of coffee, he looked up with surprise. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "I heard about what happened here, about how you stood up to those fake soldiers. That takes real courage." Linda settled into the booth across from him, recognizing the weight he carried. "What's your name, son?" "Private Marcus Thompson, ma'am, from Detroit. This is my first deployment, and I've been wondering if I'm cut out for this, if I have what it takes to be a real soldier." Linda smiled, thinking of her father's wisdom and Danny's redemption. Being a real soldier isn't about being fearless, Marcus. It's about serving something bigger than yourself, even when you're scared. It's about standing up for what's right, protecting those who can't protect themselves, and never giving up on your fellow soldiers. She gestured toward the memorial wall where her father's medals caught the afternoon sunlight. "My dad learned that lesson in Vietnam. I learned it right here in this diner. And someday, you'll learn it too. Probably when you least expect it, in a moment that tests everything you believe about yourself." Marcus nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. I think I understand." As evening approached and the convoy prepared to continue their journey, Captain Rodriguez approached Linda at the counter. "Ms. Barnes, I wanted you to know, what you did here has become legendary in military circles. They're calling it the Battle of Kingston's Last Stop, and it's being taught at leadership schools as an example of civilian courage under fire." Linda felt her cheeks flush. "I just did what needed doing?" "That's exactly what makes it legendary," Rodriguez replied. "In a world full of people who look the other way, you stood your ground. You proved that heroism isn't just for soldiers, it's for anyone willing to defend what matters." After the convoy departed, Linda found herself alone in the diner as darkness fell. She walked to her father's photo and placed her hand on the frame, feeling the warmth of the metal beneath her palm. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We kept the promise. We held the line." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows with the promise of another storm approaching. But Linda felt no fear, only readiness. Kingston's last stop had been tested by the worst humanity could offer and had emerged stronger than ever. Her father had built this place as a sanctuary for those who served. She had transformed it into something even more powerful, a fortress of honor in a world that sometimes forgot what honor meant. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the gathering darkness, its red letters spelling out the same promise they'd made for nearly 4 decades. Hot food, cold beer, warm welcome. But now those words carried extra weight, backed by the knowledge that Kingston's Last Stop was more than just a diner. It was proof that evil could be defeated by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It was evidence that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. And it was a monument to the simple truth that her father had lived by and died believing. No one fights alone, not on Linda Barnes' watch. As she locked the door and turned off the lights, Linda carried her father's Bronze Star to the safe in the back office. Tomorrow would bring new travelers, new stories, new opportunities to serve those who served others. Some would be genuine heroes deserving of respect and comfort. Others might be wolves in sheep's clothing, testing the sanctuary's defenses. Either way, Kingston's last stop would be ready. The daughter of Robert Barnes had learned the most important lesson of all. Legacy isn't just about what you inherit, it's about what you're willing to fight to protect. The storm outside grew. Stronger, but inside the diner, all was quiet and secure. And somewhere in the darkness, other travelers were fighting their way through the night, guided by the knowledge that ahead, through the wind and cold, a light was waiting. A light that would never go out. This story reminds us that heroism isn't reserved for battlefields or emergency rooms. Sometimes it's found behind the counter of a truck stop diner, in the heart of someone who refuses to let evil win. Linda Barnes proved that courage comes in many forms, but it always starts with the same simple decision: to stand up when everyone else sits down, to fight when others surrender, and to keep the light on for those still making their way home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.